Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 207, The Amazing Will Case. Part 1. In the Geelong Advertiser on the 21st of March 1911, there was an article outlined The Amazing Will Case, more improbabilities than in any novel. The validity of a will made by Catherine Elizabeth Moore, a resident of Richmond, is under consideration by Mr. Justice Hood. The deceased was the wife of a senior constable and left property at the value of £907, chiefly to her husband, and George Tipper, one of the 3 children of a former marriage, is seeking to upset the will, alleging want of testamentary capacity, founded on delusions, one of these being that she never had any children. Thomas Tipper, a son, was examined yesterday. Asked why he had threatened his mother with proceedings for bigamy, he said she had called them all blackmailing scoundrels, thieves and rogues. His Honour asked the witness when his father died, and the witness replied that his father was not dead as far as he could find out. His Honour said, "When did you see him last?" The witness said, "In 1887, I think it was." His Honour asked, "What did you mean by threatening your mother with proceedings for bigamy if you did not know whether your father was still alive?" The witness said, "My brother said he saw my father before my mother married Moore. He said he saw him riding a bicycle in Burke Street." Thomas O'Neill, a bookmaker residing in Richmond, said he knew the testatrix as Mrs. Carrodus in 1905. She repeatedly told him she'd never had a family, that she was married to Carrodus in Gippsland, that her relatives had treated her very badly, and that one of them had tried to poison her. She told him once that her nephew, Rupert Clark, had said that a certain horse would win a race, and on the strength of this information, she gave the witness 5 shillings to put on the horse, but it lost. She told the witness about going to fortune-tellers. He said he did not believe in them, and she gave him a look full of pity. So who was Catherine Elizabeth Moore? Well, she was born in 1845 in Tipperary Island, and she arrived at Port Albert, Gippsland, Victoria on the 14th of March 1864 on the Coldstream as a 19-year-old. She married Thomas Tipper in 1865 in Tarraville, Gippsland, Victoria. Thomas was 38 and Catherine 20 when they married. Thomas Tipper had arrived to Port Albert on the schooner the Albert Packet on the 2nd of January 1851. He was listed in the Melbourne Age on the 10th of October 1855 as proprietors with a licence for a hackney carriage. On the 5th of January 1860 in the Melbourne Argus, there was a small article titled "A Fighting Carman." Thomas Tipper, a carman, was charged by Mr. Rose with abusing him, striking him, and demanding more than his lawful fare. The defendant attempted to set up a defence that the plaintiff was the real offender, but the bench were of a contrary opinion and fined Tipper 40 shillings with £1 2 shillings and 6 cost, and further told him that he would have his name reported to the City Council in order that his licence might be suspended. And sure enough, on the 7th of February 1860 in the Melbourne Age, it states that the driver's licence of Thomas Tipper was cancelled. On the 16th of February 1866, so just after their marriage, in the Gippsland Guardian, a police article titled "Wife Desertion." Thomas Tipper was brought up on a warrant charged with having deserted his wife and left her without means of support. Catherine Tipper sworn, "I was married to the prisoner at Tarravale about 8 months ago. The prisoner burnt the marriage certificate 2 or 3 months ago at Rosedale. He deserted me at Sale a fortnight ago. He took service at Mrs. Inglis's and took me to Sale, where he beat and kicked me and told me that he would make me go on the streets. I have been in several situations since I've been married." The prisoner said, "I did not leave you in Sale of my own accord with another man. You did not ask me to go and get respectable lodgings at Sale." The prisoner made a long rambling statement from which it appeared he had habitually neglected her, and he stated his earnings were £1 to 25 shillings per week. The bench ordered the prisoner to pay 7 shillings per week for 3 months towards the support of his wife. 4 children were born to Catherine and Thomas Tipper, with 3 sons surviving infancy. Their eldest child, George Thomas Tipper, was born on the 1st of June 1866 in Sale, so only 3 months after that police article. George was committed on the 25th of August 1871 in Collingwood into state care for 3 years, and the cause of commitment was dwelling with a drunkard and a prostitute. The record states that his father, Thomas Tipper, was a drayman living in Wellington Street, Collingwood. His mother was in Melbourne Hospital suffering from a disease of the heart. She was described as a woman living with bad habits, who drinks to excess and is quite unfit to have charge of the children. She was arrested for threatening the life of her husband, but owing to her state of health was sent to hospital. George was released from care on the 25th of August 1874, but then recommitted as a neglected child on the 26th of May 1876. The notes on his state care record state that his father, Thomas, was believed to have died on his passage back to England in February 1873. The report also says his mother is living with a man called John Carradis in North Richmond. George was assigned to Mr. Enoch Logan in Talbot, Victoria, and was released from state care on the 26th of May 1882, so when he was 14 years old. The second child was Alfred Henry Tipper, who was born on the 12th of August 1867 at Sale. He was first committed on the same date as his brother, with the cause being the same, and he was committed to a term of state care for 5 years. He was then recommitted on the 18th of September 1876 for 7 years' care, as he was a neglected child. He was released on the 18th of September 1883, when he was 16. Alfred went to his brother, to the Logan family at Talbot. It states on Alfred's record that their father called in at King Street in August 1885, demanding to know information about his boys, but was described as insolent and overbearing. The third child was William Glenalladale Tipper, who was born on the 18th of October 1868 at Bairnsdale. He was firstly committed into state care on the same date with the same cause as his brothers. He was recommitted into state care on the 24th of August 1878 in Melbourne due to being neglected, and he was in state care till he was 16. There was a mention of Thomas Tipper on the 10th of November 1879 in the Sydney Morning Herald. Thomas Tipper was found guilty of having wantonly, without either cause or alleging a cause, assaulted David Price, who was on duty as an officer of the Transit Commissioner's Department, and was ordered to pay a penalty of 40 shillings or be in prison for 1 month. On the 25th of April 1885, in the Melbourne Australian, an inmate named Thomas Tipper was reported as having used insulting language to the superintendent and the surgeon of the institution. The committee commenced an investigation into the complaint against Tipper, but it was abandoned when the man expressed his determination to leave the institution. The institution referred to was the Melbourne Benevolent Asylum, where poor men, usually elderly men, went to live. Catherine Tipper commenced a relationship with John Carradis. John was 14 years older than Catherine and was born in England. He'd arrived in Australia on the 11th of June 1858 in Melbourne on the ship the Rising Sun when he was 27. He travelled with James and Jonathan Carradis. His address on arrival was South Yarra, and John's parents lived in Richmond. In 1869, a William John Carradis was born in Victoria. A burial record suggests that William was informally adopted by John Carradis. William's death record notes his father was Andrew McNamara and his mother Anne Chadwick. It is feasible that Anne Chadwick is actually Catherine, as Catherine's maiden name was Catherine Chadwick. William married Ellen Clare Ambrose in 1897. He was a wool classer and lived in Flemington, Victoria, and they had 3 daughters. On the 18th of March 1911, in the Melbourne Age, William Charles Carradis said that he lived with the testatrix, who was his aunt, for 28 years, and first heard that she was not married when John Carradis died. And William Charles Carradis, on the 18th of January 1917, was in the Commonwealth of Australia Gazette under the War Precautions Wool Regulations Act of 1916, and he was appointed an appraiser under William Morris Hughes, the Prime Minister, for Victoria, and he was amongst one of 6 men appointed. William Charles Carradis died in 1950 at the age of 81. There was an obituary in the Melbourne Age on the 7th of June 1950. Mr. William Charles Carradis of South Yarra, a well-known wool buyer, died during the weekend at a private hospital. He was born in New Zealand. came to Australia at an early age and became associated with the wool trade. During World War I, he was a wool appraiser for the Commonwealth Government, and during the last war acted as an inspector of scoured and carbonised wools. Since 1919, he was the chief buyer for Cooper Triffett of Bradford, England. And his death notice on the 3rd of June 1950 in the Melbourne Argus. William Charles Carrodus, 1st of June, suddenly at a private hospital in East Melbourne, formerly of 61 Marnes Street, South Yarra, beloved husband of Ellen and devoted father of Sister St John the Baptist in Hobart, Moira, Mrs Selwyn McCausland and Veronica. On the 1st of June 1878 in the Melbourne Argus, John Carrodus features. An Australian Wool Sorters Association, established in 1866, opened to supply squatters with thoroughly competent tradesmen for sheep classing, wool classing and scouring. John Carrodus, Secretary, Saltaire Cottage, Elizabeth Street, North Richmond. So it seems his adopted son, William Carrodus, continued with his father's occupation of wool classer. In 1885, a man named Edmund Colbert entered Catherine and John Carrodus's lives. He'd been married and his wife had died on the 28th of July 1885 at their home at Tiverton Cottage in 14 Rowena Parade, Richmond, Victoria. By the 2nd of October 1885, he was living at 46 Elizabeth Street, North Richmond, which was the home of Catherine and John Carrodus. He wrote a new will at this time. This new will revoked all others. It was signed 3 times by Edmund. The first 2 signatures were crossed through as they were indecipherable. This new will greatly benefited a Catherine Shadwick. Nephew Edmund and niece Bridget are the other beneficiaries. On the 12th of November 1885 in Melbourne, a codicil is added to Edmund's will, advising that if either Edmund, his nephew, or Bridget, his niece, were to challenge Edmund Sr.'s will, their full inheritance would be withdrawn and they'd receive nothing, and Catherine Shadwick would inherit it all. Edmund died on the 29th of December 1885, aged 74, at the home of Catherine Shadwick and John Carrodus. His cause of death was senile debility, and it stated on his death certificate that he had experienced that for 2 months. Catherine Shadwick is now referred to as Catherine Carrodus, an executor to the will. On the 4th of February 1886, Edmund left an estate which was largely shares of a total of £1,554, 16 shillings and 3 pence. This was distributed after expenses to his nephew Edmund Colbert, who received £687, his niece Bridget Gilmore receiving £343, and Catherine Carrodus, Shadwick, £343 plus furniture. In the Melbourne Argus on the 6th of September 1902, it announces the death of John Carrodus. On the 4th of September 1902, at Old Cobram, New South Wales, John Carrodus, of number 42 Elizabeth Street, Richmond, aged 71. There was a correction 3 days later in the Melbourne Argus. Mr. John Carrodus, husband of Mrs. Catherine Elizabeth Carrodus, of 42 Elizabeth Street, North Richmond, died at Cobram Estate, New South Wales, on the 5th of September 1902, not the 4th of that month as previously advertised, she being present at his death. Yorkshire Post Police copy. So Cobram Estate is a property just out of Deniliquin. On the 13th of September 1902 in the Melbourne Australiasian, the late Mr. John Carrodus, Mrs. Catherine Elizabeth Carrodus of 42 Elizabeth Street, North Richmond, widow of the late Mr. John Carrodus, who died at Cobram Estate on the 5th, desires to tender her most sincere acknowledgements and thanks to Dr. Graham, MRCS Deniliquin, W.R. Clark Esquire, manager of Cobram Estate, and Mrs. Clark, also Percy Hill Esquire, for their assiduous kindness and attention to the late Mr. Carrodus previously to his death. And in the Deniliquin Independent newspaper on the 12th of September 1902, death at Cobram Station. Early on Friday morning last, Mr. John Carrodus, wool classer at Cobram, died from an attack of influenza. The deceased had been ailing for some time, but it was not until the Sunday previous to his death that Dr. Graham was called in. On Thursday, the deceased showed symptoms of heart failure and the doctor was again summoned, but when he arrived, the deceased was in a state of collapse and died a few hours after the doctor's arrival. The late Mr. Carrodus, who was 78, had been a servant of the Clark family for nearly 50 years and had classed at Cobram for many years past. The remains of the deceased were taken by train to Melbourne on Saturday evening. And on the 4th of October 1902, in the Melbourne Age, the probate for John Carrodus came in and it was £1,078. John's will appeared to largely favour his adopted son William Charles Carrodus and John's sister Sarah Isherwood, and clothing went to Sarah's husband. Catherine Chadwick is included as a beneficiary, as a residual legatee. Catherine is referred in his will to be his housekeeper. Catherine reputed to have said that the bishop forgot to register their marriage. Catherine remained married to Thomas Tipper even when she went on to her next marriage, which was to Francis Norton Moore, a retired constable, which occurred in September 1907. On the 20th of March 1909, in the Victorian Richmond Guardian, in the Richmond Court, George T. Tipper proceeded against Frank Moore on a charge of having unlawfully assaulted him on the 9th of March. The defendant was also charged with using insulting words on the same date. Dr. O'Sullivan stated that the complainant called in to see him on the date in question. He was in a rather excited and nervous condition, and there was an abrasion on his left ear. There was also a congestion of the interior of his throat. George Thomas Tipper stated that he went to number 42 Elizabeth Street on the date in question, and he saw the defendant in the garden. He said that he wanted to see his mother, Mrs. Moore, and that he was her eldest son. The defendant then got him by the throat and rushed him through the gate, where he continued to throttle him and struck him in the face. He then pushed him into the street, where he again struck him. The defendant also used the words complained of. Cross-examined, complainant said that he lost sight of his mother for 16 years. He had written to his mother and she had denied him. Alex Kirby said he saw the defendant rush at the complainant and shake him by the throat. The defendant on oath said he had received a great number of insulting letters from the complainant. When the complainant said he wished to see his mother, the complainant told him that he must not go in. The complainant then insisted he see her and he tried to pass him. The witness then said the complainant tried to force his way in and struck him on the mouth and broke his pipe. Witness then collared him and pushed him out the gate. Outside, the complainant struck him and the witness retaliated. The bench dismissed the case. Catherine died on the 10th of November 1910 in Richmond, aged 65. She is buried at Burundura Cemetery in Kew in the same grave location as Edmund Colbert and his wife Susan. On the 21st of March 1911 in the Melbourne Age, an article titled A Woman's Delusions, Curious Will Case, Caviter in the Box, His Mother's Lapse of Memory, Never Known Before in British History. The action in which the validity of a will made by Catherine Moore, late of Elizabeth Street, Richmond, who died on the 10th of November, is disputed, was continued before Mr Justice Hood in the Banco Court yesterday. The testatrix, who died 2 days after making the will, left property to the value of £907. A caveat against the granting of probate was lodged by Thomas George Tipper, a farm manager of Inglewood, a son of the testatrix by former marriage. Mr MacArthur appeared for the propounders of the will, Francis N. Moore, husband of the testatrix, and William A. Jones, the executors under the will. Thomas Tipper, the caviter, said that he remembered being visited at the industrial school when a boy by a man and a woman. He saw Mrs. Moore before her death. He admitted having an altercation with Moore at his house when he came to see Mrs. Moore. He was at that time a cripple. Mrs. Moore came to the door and said, "Who's there?" Moore replied, "Tipper." She then said, "Kick him out," and called him a blackguard and a scoundrel. Moore assaulted him. While he was living at Redfern, New South Wales, the witness wrote to the testatrix enclosing a photograph. The letter was returned to him with a note from his mother. On the 4th of December 1907, he wrote to his mother using the expression, "I have been informed that you are still in the land of the living and living at Richmond." He had been told about that time that his mother was still alive. He was 43 years of age now and had earned his own living since he was 15. When he was 19 years old, he made inquiries about his mother. His aunt, Mrs. John Pope, told him that his mother was living at Elizabeth Street, Richmond, but that she would not recognise him. He called at the address given on 2 occasions but could not make anyone hear. After his mother married Moore, he first heard that she lived with Caritas. Before he wrote to the Testatrix, he had been told that she owned some property. He did not know what the property might be worth, but he thought it would be worth looking after. His brother Harry told him he had called in on his mother and had been abused by her as a blackmailing scoundrel, a rogue and a thief. Afterwards, he wrote his mother to the effect that his brothers, Harry and William, were going to law with her, but he thought her children ought to protect her. He told her he had heard of her trouble. What trouble did you refer to? I mean getting married to Moore. The witness first thought his mother insane when he knew she was getting married without knowing whether her first husband was alive or dead and could not recognise her own children. He wrote her on one occasion threatening proceedings against her in the matter of the marriage certificate and for libelling the characters of his brothers and himself. In the letter he said, I am very sorry that I have to do such a thing to my mother, but others are before her own offspring, which has never been known before in British history or among the blacks of Africa. He also made the use of the expression, you as a mother despise your own flesh and blood, which no beasts of the field do to their young. He didn't think it would be right to prosecute an insane mother for bigamy. He and his brothers were trying, at the time he wrote, to prove to their mother that they were her children. His Honour asked, when did your father die? The witness said, I did not know that he is dead. We have no record of it. When did you last see him? In 1887. What did you mean by threatening your mother with bigamy when you did not know whether your father was alive or not? I'd been told by my brother Harry that he saw our father in Burke Street, Melbourne, just before my mother married Moore. Thomas O'Neill of Hoddle Street, West Richmond, said he rented a shop from the Testatrix for nearly 3 years. He'd known her since 1905. When he took the shop, she told him she was a widow and that her relations had treated her badly. In fact, one of them had tried to poison her. One person who was against her had, she said, gone so far as to try to chisel the name off her dead husband's tombstone. The reason she gave for the attempts to poison her was that her relatives wanted her property. One day she invited him into the house and gave him a glass of something to drink. She then showed him a photo album containing portraits, as she said, of her relatives. During the Cup Week of 1903, she told him she'd been to the office of her nephew, Sir Rupert Clark, who had advised her to back a certain horse. She gave the witness 5 shillings to put on the horse, which he did. The horse lost. She told him the clerks in Sir Rupert Clark's office called her auntie, which struck him as being a peculiar thing for them to do. Some men or other were always, according to her story, about to marry her. One was named Hartley. He was very persistent. There was also a Mr. Cashin and a Darky Kingston. The Testatrix was a woman of hot temper. He had heard her swear at her servant. In the Agricultural Show Week of 1907, Mrs. Moore was visited by her son, Harry Tipper, a sturdy, respectable man, 6'2" in height, weighing 14 stone. Harry Tipper was a champion cyclist who had performed some extraordinary feats of weight carrying whilst riding, and he'd also ridden the smallest bicycle in the world, weighing only 12 pounds. The witness continued, saying that Harry Tipper called at his shop after his visit to his mother. Whilst he was there, Mrs. Moore came in and called Tipper an impostor, a blackmailer and a scoundrel. Subsequently, the Testatrix told the witness that Tipper had threatened to knock her brains out and wanted the deeds of her property. His statement that he was her son was absurd, as she'd never had any children. She had charge of 3 boys whose mother had dropped dead. Before her marriage to Moore, she said she was going to get married and the Archbishop was going to lend her his carriage. Moore, she said, had been her friend from childhood. Her former husband, John Caritas, she declared, came to her nightly in visions to guide her in all things. Sometime in 1907, she stated she had seen the Blessed Virgin, before whom a procession of men passed in review. The Testatrix on another occasion informed the witness that 2 men, one of whom was named Hall, had made an attempt to hypnotise her. They came into her dining room and Hall made passes with his hands. Just as she felt she was going off, her servant Alice came in and saved the situation. She also said she produced an old pistol, which made the men go away in a hurry, one scrambling over the fence. When the Testatrix felt lonely, she would send for the witness to come and chat with her. When she told him that her relatives had tried to poison her, he replied that they must be a bad lot. She spoke earnestly, and he did not disbelieve her. From the time Harry Tipper came on the scene, there was bad feeling between them. He did not believe her when she told him that the Archbishop was lending her his carriage for her wedding. The registers of the Neglected Children's Department were produced to show when the Tipper boys were committed. The marriage certificate of the Tippers and the baptismal certificates of the children were also put in. Ellen Elizabeth Brennan said she knew the Testastrix for over 30 years as Mrs. Tipper, sometimes called Curly Kate Tipper. At that time, the witness was 15 years of age. Mrs. Tipper had 3 children, all boys, and ran away from them. In later years, when the witness spoke to her about her children, the Testastrix denied she ever had any. Witness was born in 1861. According to the records of the Neglected Children's Department, the first of the Tippers was received in that establishment in 1871. This would have made the witness only 10 years of age at the time. She was, however, positive that she was 15. His Honour remarked that he was satisfied Mrs. Moore had been a Miss Chadwick and subsequently a Mrs. Tipper with 3 children. Witness had, however, raised doubt whether the caviter was one of those children. Mr. Cohen said that he should be able to show that there was no other family of that name in the state. James Cooper spoke of various acts of eccentricity on part of the Testastrix. In a conversation about the claim of the Tipper boys to be her children, she scouted the idea that she ever had children. She gave him the name of a number of men whom she described as most anxious to marry her. Witness had a chance of marrying her himself, but would not take it on, and the case was adjourned. On the 22nd of March 1911 in the Bendigo Independent, The Forgotten Marriage, an unprecedented case, a mother forgetting her children. George Herbert Cattering, clerk in the Department of Neglected Children, produced records of the department showing the committal of one son of Catherine Tipper on the 25th of May 1871 from Collingwood and another son in 1876. This record showed that the mother was in hospital suffering from disease of the heart and that the father was in the Benevolent Asylum in 1885. Mr. MacArthur said, "This is very important. It seems very doubtful now if she's the same woman." Mr. Justice Hood said it raises considerable doubt. Another record showed father dead, mother living with John Carradis, 1875. Mrs. Brennan added, "He is so like his mother, especially about the eyes and the nose. I saw Mrs. Tipper about 4 or 5 years after. I met her in a shop and addressed her by name, but she said she never knew anyone of that name, and I said, 'You are Curly Kate Tipper. I knew your 3 boys.' She came from behind the counter and chased me from the shop." Mr. Justice Hood asked, "Are you quite sure there were 3 boys there when their mother left them?" And she said, "I am." James Cooper, a wool sorter of Richmond, said he'd known Mrs. Moore and John Carradis for 20 years. He'd heard Mrs. Carradis called by the name of Curly Tipper. When Carradis died at Old Cobram, she said that he was poisoned. When the witness showed her the advertisement inquiring for the mother of the Tippers, she said they were a lot of lies and turned away. She had seen the advertisement before. She told the witness a lot of people were anxious to marry her. Detective Howard stated he knew the caviter at a place near Kangaroo Flat where he went to school with him. Subsequently, Thomas Tipper was hired out by the Neglected Children's Department to a man at Talbot. William James Perry, a clerk in the employ of Abbott and Beckett, solicitors, said he'd known Tipper as George Thomas Tipper. A search had been made at the Government Statistician's Office, and the only name that could be found likely to refer to Tipper was of Thomas Tipper, and believing Tipper was labouring under the misapprehension in regard to his Christian name, he advised him to adhere to the name as registered to prevent complications. Ellen Fletcher, a resident of Abbotsford, said she first knew Tipper 25 years ago and she believed him to be the son of Thomas Tipper. He was then around 18 or 19 years of age and had just come from a school for neglected children. She was only about 18 when she met Tipper. Her parents' name was Pope, but they were no relation to Tipper. Mr. MacArthur asked His Honour if he thought there'd been any undue influence, and His Honour said, "I am prepared to find against the caviter on that point." Mr. Cohen addressed the court at considerable length on the evidence, and he contended that it was not necessary to prove that the testatrix was a raving lunatic, but only that she was of proper testamentary capacity when she made her will. The evidence showed that she was a most extraordinary woman. In part 2, I'll be covering in detail the letters that Thomas Tipper wrote to his mother, and I'm also going to do a bonus episode on the 3 sons that were put into state care. What was alluded to earlier, Harry Tipper, was quite a notable entertainer and cyclist, and there's a story of its own that's attached to Harry.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.